Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. And we'll just apologies for technical difficulties there. Ran a couple of minutes late, but thank you, everyone, for joining. And I see a lot of familiar faces. And we looks like there's just a couple people being still let in from the waiting room. And I think we're all here. So we will start. My name is Alan Levine. I'm CEO of Hasbara International. Based here in the US. This is a Hasbara Canada leadership session. We have our student leaders and we have our lay leaders and our supporters network from both sides of the border, from the US and Canada, here joining us today. We're honored to be able to welcome the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada, Mr. John Baird.
Great to be with you.
And it's a real honor to have you. We will introduce you here in just a moment. But I did want to just, for anyone new and joining us here, I want to just tell you for a minute what we do at Hasbara Fellowships, and most will be familiar with our work, but we've been working on university campuses across the US and Canada now for over 20 years, helping Jewish students fight antisemitism and do pro-Israel work on campuses, which, of course, since October 7th has been, unfortunately, all too necessary. We do these leadership sessions every month here to just offer continuing education to our network of Hasbara leaders. And this month, we're honored to be joined by Mr. Baird. So with that, I want to just hand it over to a member of the Hasbara Canada board, Mr. Jeff Aharon, who is going to introduce our guest speaker.
Thanks very much, Alan. It's a pleasure to be with so many of you here today. I want to start by saying thanks everyone for joining and for helping support Hasbara Fellowships. It is a tremendous organization that has been a big part of my life. I'm actually an alumni as well. And it was a turning point in my life that really taught me what it is to be a true advocate for Israel, to learn about what's going on and how to become and maintain our education on the matter, how to become a better advocate. And I know there's a lot of other alum that feel the same way and some of them have gone on to do really incredible things in the public arena. For example, just a couple of them, we have Melissa Lantzman, the current deputy leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. We have Dan Iluz, who's a member of Knesset in Israel. So Hasbara Fellowships is really doing wonderful things to help change lives and change the opinions of the wider audience on Israel. So thanks everyone for supporting the organization. And thank you, John, Right Honourable former Minister of Foreign Affairs, John Baird. Thank you so much for being a real friend of the organization. You are a friend of the community, and as someone who's been involved in politics for the better part of 2 decades, you have loomed large in my mind and in the minds of many other people who have been thrilled by, we're thrilled by your pushing of Canada towards taking a moral stance on Israel and many other matters on foreign affairs. You really helped turn the ship of Canada from becoming just a neutral party on so many matters to taking true moral stances on what's right and allying Canada with the liberal democracies of the world. So thank you very much for being such a tremendous friend of Israel and of liberal democracies everywhere, and for joining us here today. I'll hand it back to you, Alan and John.
Thanks, Jeff.
Pleasure.
Yes, thanks so much, Jeff. And Mr. Former Foreign Minister, Mr. Baird, it's a true honor to have you. And I have a whole list of questions here I want to ask you about a number of topics. We'll try to cover a lot of ground. But before we do, I just want to take a moment to just recognize you and your leadership. And when you were in government, you were a true moral giant, a true statesman that really put morality first, that defended democracies against tyranny and against terrorism. And of course, in this audience, your friendship to Israel was something we admired tremendously. And so it's a true honor to have you, and want to thank you for joining us.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. In January, I was in the United Kingdom in England and did 11 events for a pro-Israel student group. So let me say this: I know it's a tough time since October the 7th. It's been a tough time to be a Jew, a tough time to be a Zionist, a tough time to be a pro-Israel advocate. But there's perhaps no tougher role than a pro-Israel advocate and a Jew on campuses, whether it be in Canada, the United States, or the UK, just of three countries. What we've seen is an uptake in pro-terrorist support, in anti-Semitic behavior. Probably the saddest moment on the anti-Semitism front came when a good friend of mine told me his mother told him about anti-Semitism when he was growing up as a young boy here in Canada, and he really didn't know what she meant. And his mother has since passed, but he's all aware too much of what she meant since October the 7th. So it's tremendously important for all of you and the community to know that you're not alone, that you've got friends that are prepared to stand with you, not behind you, but side by shoulder to shoulder with you on the tough days.
Thank you so much, and that really does mean a lot coming from a leader such as yourself, and I think you hit the nail on the head there when you say, that reassurance that we're not alone is certainly something that I think we need to hear. You're one of the people we've heard it from since long before October 7th. I do actually want to start by asking you about that topic, and I want to ask you about the world and a little bit about politics and touch on a number of topics. But we do focus our work here at Hasbara on the anti-Semitism on university campuses, and you've made the time to work with us over the years. You spoke to us last in 2020. You didn't just wake up to what's going on October 7th, but it seems that many leaders have, and it's in a way been a vindication of our work. We've been sounding the alarms of this anti-Semitism on university campuses for years, and it seems that now it's got some real attention. It's on top of the agenda for leaders in Canada, in the U.S. We've heard, I think, almost every presidential candidate discuss it. And I might add in Israel, there've been hearings in the Knesset where Hasbara fellows were invited, and we met with President Herzog. So we're seeing now attention being paid to the topic, and I wonder if you think there's something that could be done at the government level. Is there a legislative path or policy path to?
I want to say this. I think I disagree with you, Alan. I don't think it's people are waking up. What I fear is the exact opposite, that too many people in leadership and in government are actually not waking up. They're falling asleep or turning their back. People are free to support the government of Israel's actions or oppose the government of Israel's action. Not everything any government does is worthy of support. But surely there should be no hesitation whatsoever for any leader in Canada to speak out forcefully against anti-Semitism, to speak out forcefully and immediately against the sexual violence and conflict, to speak out against brazen terrorism that targets civilians, human atrocities. And this is the thing that surprised me. And the rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen in the West, and I can speak particularly of Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom, where this is eerily similar to the early 30s. When I first visited the old Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, I didn't fully appreciate the Holocaust in context. But when you look at what happened in the early 30s and how it gradually rose and rose, it's deeply disturbing. And we've seen many of the seeds of this. Targeting a Jewish restaurant in Toronto, there was Mount Sinai Hospital was protested, and doctors, physicians, patients were prevented from getting in or out. Jewish-owned bookstore. This is eerily out of Germany in the early 30s, and everyone has a responsibility. Any rational, decent person has a responsibility to speak out and speak out forcefully. And I think too many people are bowing to the woke culture, the politically correct culture, which is not exclusively dealing with Israel and anti-Semitism. But in Canada, we've seen our government keep one eye on the Arab and Muslim vote, and another eye on an international terrorist organization that's targeting civilians and committing atrocities. And this is deeply, deeply disturbing. And I hate to say that I told you so, but Canada under Stephen Harper, we cut off all ties and all funding to UNRWA because we said it was infested with terrorists. And I think we know now only of 17 terrorists who are UNRWA employees. These are the ones we know of when we have no access to conduct investigations. We knew for many, many years that UNRWA schools were rocket depots, and the government of Canada and other rational governments stepping up to provide financial assistance is really atrocious. And the moral relativism we've seen creep into our dialogue is just really, I'll say, just disgusting.
And Mr. Baird, and yes, and actually we have a question about UNRWA coming up, and that is one of the examples of where I think you were ahead of your time during your time in government, and were able to recognize that in a moral way, in a direct way, and yes, you took on UNRWA at the time, and it's only become, it seems like, I hate to use the word fashionable, but it's only starting to happen now around the world. But I do, want to respond to your question by just asking you, why is it so hard for leaders to speak up, and like you said, there's so many more very obvious cases now of where anti-Semitism is just so, it's so obvious in so many cases. It's you have the perpetrators really crossing the line into violence. It's hard for them to say now, well, I'm just exercising my rights of free speech, or I'm standing up for the Palestinians, right? But it seems in politics at the university leadership level, it seems hard for leaders to offer a clear condemnation of anti-Semitism. I wonder if you have any views on why.
Well, I think the most telling, grotesque example of this are when 3 or 4 senior academic leaders of Ivy League universities in the United States appeared before the House of Representatives. These were 4 individuals who were incredibly well educated, who no doubt were incredibly well prepared for questions that they knew were coming, and still each one of them crashed and burned. And if the president of Harvard can't clearly and unequivocally come out against calls for genocide, where has this world come to? And I really admire the brave people who've spoken up and taken leadership positions, demanding accountability. People like my friend Bill Ackman in New York, and we need to hold more and more people account. But it's sad that you would have thought an elite Ivy League education leader would have been the person who knew this best. But they've become so woke and so politically correct, and so deeply concerned about offending people. If people want to protest against Israel, that's fair game. Protest the embassy, protest the consulate, but to try to shut down any debate on a college campus where Jews even wanting to set up a booth, young Jews wanting to set up a booth to highlight the plight of the hostages, many of whom have been men, women, and children, and the injured, and they're not allowed to put that up. That is really beyond the pale. Something that I never thought I would see in this century.
And just to kind of follow up on it, there was one case. I'll just name a case from a week ago. University in California. It was University of California at Santa Barbara, where what happened there was a sign put up on a university building that said "Zionists not welcome," and then on an official university social media channel, the sign was sent out as if to broadcast the message: "Zionists not welcome." To his credit, the chancellor of the university condemned that the next day. But what was interesting is that he did condemn that sign, the one that said "Zionists not welcome," but then in his statement he said, we are firmly against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and all forms of bigotry. And it just seems like even in the best of cases here, we're seeing an inability of leaders to condemn anti-Semitism without condemning Islamophobia in the same sentence, right? When the incident that happened was clearly anti-Semitic, not any other form of bigotry, but he wasn't able to just isolate it and only say he condemns anti-Semitism, and which we read as significant, right? There's a certain fear to or some hesitation to just condemn anti-Semitism on its own. And
Listen, I mean, there was a Muslim cultural center not far from my home in Toronto, where 2 or 3 individuals were harassed and assaulted. I was the first person to speak up against it. So that's fair and appropriate. But when people can't speak of it, I mean, the cause célèbre at this time, at this hour in the West is rising anti-Semitism. And if someone doesn't feel comfortable taking a clean comment condemning it, they certainly don't have the values that we would hope certainly our post-secondary education institutions would lead. And and in many cases, I think what happened on October the 7th and what has happened after October the 7th in Israel, in the region, and in the West is a compelling case for Zionism about why we need a Jewish state. That why well into almost 100 years after the early 30s, why it's imperative that there be a Jewish state to protect the minorities and to give a safe place of refuge, which is the Zionist dream.
Everyone in this room.
I'll give you a story. I visited, when I was minister, I visited the old city of Jerusalem, and I was with a friend, and we came around a group of IDF soldiers, and he noticed a family friend of his was there, and he was from France, so we met and we had a chat. And I noticed, so you must be the commander of this platoon or this brigade, what have you, because he was about 10 years older than everyone. And he said, no, I'm a first-year IDF recruit. I said, well, why are you so much older? He said, well, his family had made Aliyah the year before because for 3 occasions in Bordeaux, France, he was beaten to an inch of his life by gangs, anti-Semitic gangs that almost killed him. And his mother and father said, enough, we've had enough. We can go to Israel. And I never thought you'd see, literally thousands of examples like that in the last few months.
Right. No kidding. And one thing we've done at Hasbara is when we take students to Israel, is to try and meet with Jews who've moved to Israel from France, Venezuela, and now Ukraine, which are really very recent examples of Jewish communities
and these are, France is different from Venezuela and Ukraine. It's an advanced economy. Right. The national logo is fraternity, equity, liberté. If people don't feel safe in major French urban areas in this century, that's horrific. And of course, it's only gotten demonstrably worse since October the 7th. And this notion that to hold Israel to such a higher accountability than anyone is held. Listen, I grieve for every civilian that is killed in Gaza. It's a horrific consequence of war. War is hell, but the blood of those victims is purely on the hands of the Hamas terrorists. When a father of I often say there's a mom and dad with 3 kids, and dad has put a rocket launcher on the roof of the family home, and he's launching rockets at hospitals, civilian areas, and schools. What does he expect the IDF to do? They send flyers, they send text messages warning the family to get out, but the consequence of that family's passing, it rests squarely on the head of the household. And while we're at it, let's ask where the household was on the morning of October the 7th. Right. And let's talk about who brought in the curriculum that those young children receive at UNRWA schools, which is promotes violence against Jews, which promotes genocide, which promotes anti-Semitism. And
we have to make the case, and we have to repeat our arguments over and over, and it's helpful to hear it from you. And thank you for that.
And I'll tell you this. We've got to hold our elected officials accountable. Israel does not need friends. Israel needs friends on the difficult days, on its most challenging days. And the government in Canada has really let Canadians down, has really let the Jewish community down, the pro-Israel community, and it can't go back to be the way it was. we need moral clarity.
Amen. And we're with you on that. And so, Red, I actually want to switch gears a little bit and ask you just about geopolitics and just what you see as a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, just how you're reading the Middle East now. And there's talk of wider war. I think we're seeing signs of wider war. It's not just Israel and Gaza. Obviously, violence on the Lebanon border. The Houthis are making some noise, and I think everyone's looking at Iran, thinking about their next move. And I wonder what your read is of the current situation and what we should be looking for in the coming.
Well, I'll say two things. One is the Sunni Arab world, the Sunni Arab Gulf states have not broken off diplomatic relations with Israel, have not responded in the same hysterical way that some Western woke leftists have responded, and that speaks volumes. And the second thing I'd say is that let's at some point Israel, at some point the United States, Canada, and the West, and the Sunni Arab world, at some point we've got to stop fighting fires and we've got to start taking the matches away. Iran is the biggest threat to international peace and security. Iran trained, armed, funded Hamas. It does the same with Hezbollah in South Lebanon. It does the same with Shia militias in Iraq and in Syria, which has targeted dozens and dozens and dozens of American installations. They fund, train, and equip the Houthis, which are causing huge problems to the freedom of the seas. So Iran, their fingerprints are all over this. They bombed Saudi Arabia. They've tried to foment dissent in Bahrain. They've occupied 2 or 3 Emirati islands for decades. At some point, we've got to go after the source of all this problem, and that is the mullahs in Tehran. And the problem is not the Iranian people. The Iranian people do not support this regime. This is the mullahs, and until they realize that they're going to be held accountable for their actions, I fear we're going to see more of this. And just to end is that this is a stark reminder. If we didn't believe this on October the 6th, we should today, that under no conditions should we allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons.
Amen. And we agree with that. And I would ask you, and I know it's tough to speculate, for you not being in government anymore, but well, if I could ask you just directly, what would be your move at this time if you were back in government? I mean, is it the right time to confront them?
Well, I mean, first thing I would be doing is giving unqualified support for Israel's right to defend itself. I think we've got to acknowledge that we find the civilian casualties and civilian infrastructure damage horrific, but this is entirely responsible by the Hamas leaders and their henchmen in Tehran. It's bad enough that the government of Israel, bolstered by opposition leaders, has got to confront Hamas, has got to confront the hostages, but to have to waste time having to confront the government of Canada and radicals in the U.S. Congress and in the EU, that's just too much. So first, people have to stand up for what's morally right and do everything they can to support Israel. I'll tell you, when 9/11 happened back in 2001, the response in Afghanistan and later Iraq were real and significant. And this is a tea party compared to that. There is perhaps no other armed forces in the history of humanity which has done more to limit civilian casualties than the IDF. And this is from studies that have been done after previous wars. And it's real and significant. The second thing, we need to hold Iran's feet to the fire. And at some point, I think we will have to confront the evil that is in Tehran. And Ronald Reagan, I think, took out more than 50% of their Navy in a response to one terrorist attack. And as he left the White House briefing room podium, a reporter yelled out, and they said, "Don't you think you might get a nasty military response?" And he just looked at the reporter and said, "They're not that stupid." And there was a reason why the hostages that the students had taken in Tehran at the U.S. Embassy, there was a reason why when Ronald Reagan put his hand on the Bible to be sworn in as president, at that very hour, at that very moment, they were leaving Iranian airspace because they didn't want to mess with President Reagan. And I think we need to take a much tougher stance.
And I want to ask you along those lines, I wonder if you have any insight or anything you can tell us about what's happening with the Houthis in Yemen. Because I mean, we agree, tougher stance. We know we've been observing Iran and other terrorist regimes for a long time. And but in practicality, I mean, it seems concerning that there's now a confrontation with the Houthis in Yemen, and it seems like they're not going away. It seems like they're still able to attack.
Well, now there's now in recent hours and days, people have been killed. A gigantic cargo ship with a huge amount of bunker diesel, potential environmental catastrophe has been sunk. At some point, you've got to confront Tehran and to say that they have the power, they have the influence, and they have the means to stop this. And if they don't in short order, they'll have to confront a response directly.
Right. Right. And it does seem, and I wonder what you think of this, but it seems, my read is you could argue that the confrontation now is better than later, right? I mean, they get closer to a nuclear weapon. This problem could be tougher to deal with if.
Well, let me look at give you a few examples. I've met the Israeli pilots who took out the nuclear program in Iran in the early 80s. There was no response. While Israel has never claimed responsibility, someone blew up Syria's nuclear program over 10 years ago, and there was never a response to that. President Reagan took out over 50% of Iran's navy, and there was no response. President Trump took out Qasem Soleimani, and there was no response. So I think they understand one thing, and it's strength.
Right. And
this is the center of evil in the world. I mean, people are looking at China as a national security threat. That's a dream compared to the day-to-day support that we see for terrorism and killing Americans and killing others. And it's got to be confronted.
I want to ask you if I can ask you a personal question here, just about your not too personal, but just a question about your experience in government. And I'm hearing you now just speaking with that moral clarity that we've been used to from you over the years. And one of the things that comes to mind from your career was you met with Tzipi Livni in Eastern Jerusalem, and at the time made some headlines as some of the headlines said you broke a taboo by meeting with Israeli leaders in the eastern side of the city. And it seemed like that's something you're proud of, having been correct me if I'm wrong, but seems like something you're proud of, having been out there supporting your Democratic allies, but even when it's not easy, even when it's not easy to do. And
it was hardly something, I'll tell you, it's hardly something brave and courageous to go to an office building in East Jerusalem to meet the Israeli Minister of Justice. That doesn't require any bravery, and it doesn't require any courage. I'll tell you, if you're students at the University of Santa Barbara and you want to set up, having a pro-Israel event or to have a pro-Israel booth on campus, that's courageous. For me to go on an IDF helicopter to the Golan Heights, that's not courageous or brave. It's courageous and brave for people to walk through a mob to take their Jewish children to day school when people are trying to stare them down. I look back at my time at Foreign Affairs in Canada, and the amount of time, effort, and energy that people would go in. Our ambassador would be invited to an event in Jerusalem, and they pull out the maps, and they'd spend hours and hours and hours, and then they'd find that 1 square inch of the room is located behind the green line. Oh, we can't go. And I just never could understand how vehemently, ideologically they were against it. Prime Minister Harper was called to the foreign ministry for a briefing. We were trying to evacuate Canadians from Lebanon back in 2011. And they were doing a press conference of him being briefed by all the consular services and how we were going to get people out, airlifts, et cetera, et cetera. And the public servants there had a map. And Harper couldn't believe it. So Harper, after the meeting, brought the map back to his office in the Prime Minister's office. And it was just before I was Foreign Minister. And I was the leader of the government in the House of Commons, basically the majority leader. And he called me up because my office is right down the hall from his. And he's holding the map up above his head. He said, "John, what do you notice about this map?" And it was a map of the Middle East with no Israel in it.
Oh.
How could the Department of Foreign Affairs, professional diplomats, make that kind of mistake? Wow. How could they possibly? They never would make the mistake the other way. When I became Foreign Minister, I was hell-bent and determined to change. We'd been in government for 5.5 years, but had a minority parliament where we didn't have control of the House of Commons. So I wanted to change all of our votes at the UN to align ourselves with the United States to stop piling on Israel annually and stop being anti-Israel at the UN. And, my officials told me, there'd be a full Arab trade boycott of Canada. This would be the biggest change in Canadian foreign policy. Hell would break loose with the Palestinians. All hell would break loose in the House of Commons and with the media. We changed all of our votes. Mm-hmm. I didn't get a single call from the press. I didn't get a single question in Parliament. I met with Salam Fayyad, the then Palestinian Prime Minister, 5 weeks later in Abu Dhabi, and he didn't even raise it. Mm. So I think there's a lot of people who lack courage and the courage of their convictions. And, Mrs. Thatcher once said when she left office, she wanted to go into business and start a company called Rent a Spine. And I think that's what we need to do. And you know what? Like I had, for the Americans, the British parliamentary system, which Canada has, you have to be basically a congressman and Minister of Foreign Affairs, but you have to be a congressman to be Minister of Foreign Affairs. And in my district, I was very grateful for the 2,800 Jews in my district. But I also had 11,500 Muslims and Arabs, which I didn't enjoy widespread enthusiastic support from. So sometimes you have to do the right thing.
Right. But I do respectfully, it seems like you're, I think, downplaying the courage that it took to take that meeting in East Jerusalem. I mean, how did it feel to have critics, tell you either in that example or the example of changing the way Canada voted in the UN, to have critics tell you you're going to start World War III? I mean,
you just got to learn not to listen to the noise in the background. You've got to just learn to listen. You do what's right and let the chips fall where they may. Also, do what's right. That's there's not enough of politicians on the left or the right. And I mentioned the left a few times. I take no pride or joy that it's the left that is the anti-Israeli sentiment or anti-Semitic sentiment, because 50 or 60 years ago it would have been the right. So I don't take any pleasure or delight in that.
And I'm going to ask you my last question, Mr. Baird, and then we have Jeff has a question for you as well, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And so everyone in the audience, if you have a question, please feel free to just raise your hand, which you can do by clicking participants, and there's a hand icon there. If you want to start putting your questions in the chat and raising your hand, that would be great. And I'll just have my last question here, which you mentioned the Abraham Accord countries, and on our last time you spoke in one of these Hasbara leadership sessions was 2020, right before the Abraham Accords. And you told me, and we were on a strict deadline, we had to wrap up the session. And you told me there are some great people in the Gulf states. And a couple of months later, we had the Abraham Accords. So what can you tell us about that? I mean,
I think the Arab world are our friends. The United Arab Emirates is it's not a liberal democracy, but it's an incredibly well-governed country. They've got smart, thoughtful, dedicated leaders who are building an amazing society. They actually have a minister of tolerance. The government built the Abraham Center in Abu Dhabi, which has a synagogue, a mosque, and a Christian church all in one complex to show what it means to be a pluralist. Saudi Arabia is taking remarkable reforms and was just about to sign the Abraham Accords, and that likely was one of the instigators of what happened on October the 7th. Bahrain, the king would go to menorah lightings. It's good. Obviously, what happened with the peace accords in Egypt and and Jordan are great. So all of these Sunni Arab countries, particularly in the Gulf, I used to see Iran just through the lens of Israel. Well, all these other Gulf states, Sunni Arab Gulf states, see the threat that Iran poses and are our allies. And it also sends an important message. If Israel can make peace with Jordan, with Egypt, if the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, why can't the Palestinians make peace with Israel?
That's well put. Let me hand it over to Jeff, who has a couple of questions for you. Mr. Baird. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I could not agree more, Minister Baird, about the direction that the UAE is taking. Whereas in Canada, many Jews are feeling the tide turning the other way, that this rise in anti-Semitism and inherently anti-Zionism, and not just among groups that are traditionally anti-Israel or anti-Semitic, but among among the left as well, especially the progressive
and the political elites.
Yes, absolutely. The political elites too. And the question here is like, are these political elites just chasing votes? What's it going to take for Canada, and let's also talk about the US, to not continue down this path of more anti-Israel sentiment, more anti-Semitism? Is it even possible to stop this? And not just changing this at the political level, but also institutionally as well throughout all of society?
Well, I think it's obviously, in my humble opinion, the leadership in Israel has to take out the military wing of Hamas. Otherwise, we'll be into the same situation in a few years or a few months. So they have a responsibility to do that. I don't think things are going to calm down until they accomplish the defeat of the military wing of Hamas. But then there'll be a lot of relationship rebuilding to make, and frankly, a lot of accountability. You look at Representative Bowman in New York; he faced a tough challenge. Elian Omar in Minneapolis was nearly taken out in her nomination last time. We've got to hold these anti-Semites accountable for their abhorrent actions.
I could not agree with you more there. And with great credit to you and Prime Minister Harper, you really shifted, like I'd mentioned before, shifted Canadian foreign policy. And I think that for a while it seemed like you were going to have a lasting effect beyond even your government. That please go ahead.
I was so pleased when all those resolutions on the vote that I changed in 2011. The Liberal government kept our voting record for 4 years, and it was only about 28 days after they were reelected that they changed all the votes back to try to get Arabs to votes for the beyond the Security Council of the United Nations, and they actually lost Arab support because people, many of my Arab counterparts, they never spoke against me, never encouraged me to change, but they may have not have always agreed with me or with Canada or with Prime Minister Harper, but they respected us, and they have no respect for this government.
Yeah, the respecting strength is, I think, very clear, and you and that your government really proved it out that we can go against the leaders in the bureaucratic offices that tell you the world's going to explode if you do this, but they'll respect our strength. Now, I think that your legacy has continued on in Canada. It's clear though that the Liberal government, like you said, they've reversed course, and they're even going further down that path where they're now going to be increasing funding to UNRWA. That news broke yesterday. But you have some of the legacy of your office. We have Shuv Majumdar, who's now an MP, and hopefully will have a senior role in the next government should the Conservatives win control of government again. Do you think that there's any chance that you might ever step your toe back in the water? David Cameron came back as a senior statesman. Would you, as a young senior statesman, ever jump back into the political fray in Canada?
Well, 2 years ago, I jumped back in the political fray by co-chairing Pierre Poilievre's campaign, who's the new conservative leader. He's very good on Middle Eastern issues. He's very good on Iran, excellent on Israel. I actually chaired his first campaign when he ran in my district before I was an MP back in 2004. I've taken him to the Middle East when I was foreign minister. He's met Bibi, he's met the Arab leadership. I think he has all the makings to be a phenomenal prime minister and to restore Canada some respect to Canada on the world stage and to be a valued ally of Israel and the Sunni Arab states.
Of course, definitely agree with you that October 2025 can't come soon enough. And of course, we welcome the support among all the political parties in Canada. We still have some friends in the Liberal Party too, but it'll be wonderful to see Canada take that moral clarity that you set forth for us. So thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Get back to you, Alan, for the rest of our questions.
Yes, and thank you. And again, if you have a question, if you can just click reactions on the bottom of your screen and raise your hand, and we'll try to get a few questions in. I'll start by just reading some of the questions in the chat here, which we have somebody I saw it a second ago echoing you, Jeff, asking you, Mr. Baird, to run for prime minister. So that's one of the things in there that the audience is mentioning. Of course, we're not in the business of partisan politics or elections here at Hasbara, but doesn't mean we can't.
I want to see pro-Israel people from every party run for office and get elected.
Yes, amen. True for friends on both sides of the aisle in Canada, friends on both sides of the aisle in the United States as well. I actually want to ask you a little bit while we let everyone get their questions in. I have another question for myself here, which is just a little bit about just communication. And one of the things that our Hasbara fellows as leaders on campus, we're really constantly training our students on communication strategies and the best way to kind of get your message across. And it seems to me like after October 7th, we should be seeing more moral clarity. October 7th itself, if you just describe what actually happened in detail, I think you can really convince a lot of people of what the truth is. Well, and
I think the biggest challenge that the pro-Israel activists have faced has been the overwhelmingly biased media. We look at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is the state broadcaster in Canada. The head of journalistic standards put out a memo to all their journalists saying that they shouldn't call Hamas a terrorist organization because these journalists shouldn't take sides in the conflict. And I found that morally repulsive. And it's just another nail in the coffin of the CBC. Pierre has promised to defund the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And I think their actions since October the 7th have demonstrably strengthened the power of his message. We've got to hold media outlets to account. It constantly stuns me. I get an email every day from a group called Honest Reporting, and they go after for corrections. And the scale of the lies, and they're lies. They're not. They make mistakes, but they never make mistakes the other way. The CBC actually reported to Canadians that Hamas didn't start this war with Israel. They actually reported that to Canadians. Like, how can you possibly deny that fact? So I think holding the media to account is hugely important.
And actually, a good friend of ours is Gil Hoffman, the executive director of Honest Reporting. He was actually our guest a couple of months ago. They do great work.
They do great work, but they're just pounding their forehead against a brick wall, unfortunately.
I'm sorry to hear that. One interesting thing we talked about though is they did expose the fact that there were journalists. Forgive me if I'm getting the details wrong here, but I think an hour after the terrorists crossed into Israel on October 7th, journalists were right there, which begs the question: did they know about this? Were they somehow in cahoots with Hamas? And Yeah, I guess I'm sorry to hear you think they're banging their head against the brick wall. I thought
I
maybe
know, but I mean as a compliment. There's just such a wave of anti-Israel lies out there, and they've got the one of the tough. I mean, if you dealing on campuses, they're dealing with the mainstream media it's a tough job, man. It's a tough job, and they do a great job. So I didn't mean to suggest that they weren't. But you know, I went in to use a phone at one of the embassies when I was traveling. So they said, "Oh, you can just use this diplomat's office," and the guy had a framed picture of him marching in Al Aqba Day. Like, and you just think this guy, not only he did that as a Canadian diplomat, but he was like, didn't see anything wrong with putting a picture of it up in his office.
And you know, is that? I mean, you told us that story, and you've told us about the map that did not include Israel.
And my deputy, when I became foreign minister, I told him that story. He said, "John, that did not happen. That is not true." And one of my assistants pulled it up on his phone and showed him, and it was the Prime Minister himself holding it.
Wait, the Prime Minister?
No, the Prime Minister was so angry he took the map and to show people how Israel they were.
Right, and I mean, is this? I mean, there've been is that endemic to Canada's foreign service? Is that?
I think the thing, with great respect, I think the same thing would be at the U.S. State Department or the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the UK.
Right. It's unfortunately not where our best friends work in government. Right. Another place where good work has to be done, just like on the university campuses. Mr. Baird, are there any last thoughts you want to leave us with? And I apologize to everyone in the audience. We seem to have some technical difficulties. I'm not seeing the hands today. But and we're getting close to out of time here. And I want to just ask you.
Oh, there's one hand.
You see one hand?
Yeah.
Who do we have?
It's
You have Alexander
Sials.
Oh, Alec, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? If you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. It's a very, in a way, simple question, maybe difficult to execute. If you all just think, step back, I'm the one that's been writing here. The atrocities, the terrors, a lot of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism books, education is fed by, I believe, two entities. Number one, over the many, many years, Saudi Arabia has provided tremendous amount of money to Pearson from England. I mean, I'm on several committees. I've been working on even looking at educational stuff that's fabricated for children. So one. Second, Iran. I keep saying, if you step back, I know it's not easy, but their tentacles are everywhere. I don't just mean Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and they are all the way to, if you think about it, from Egypt to Muslim Brotherhood to all these jihads.
No, they're like blowing up Chabad houses in Mumbai, community centers in Buenos Aires.
Exactly. I am saying this. Now, I know you can't do this, or I can't. I mean, listen, I'm just thinking all the time that words mean very little now. I'm the one that just wrote that anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, these words no longer mean anything, because to me, anti-Semitism, I'm immigrated from Poland, from under communism. They spat on me, they hit me. Okay, that's anti-Semitism. Okay, but now it is not. It is absolute genocide of Jewish people, eradication, wiping out the Jewish state of Israel. This is what everyone wants. Iran is paying, maybe even Saudi Arabia still, all these people rising up on the streets, etc., all over the world. So this is not just a little thing like when Hitler brought to power, I mean, during 30s. This is a disaster. This, for us Jewish people, I'm telling you, 4 grandchildren I have. I'm almost done. Just so you understand. For me, I can't sleep at night. I don't know why hostages are still there. And finally, did you see United Nations finally went to Israel and admitted, yes, the women were raped, tortured, whatever. They finally came out after 5 months. My heart has been bleeding. All I'm saying, and I'm done, just question to everyone, wherever you go, whoever you speak to, we need to tell Iran what I wrote, maybe some of you didn't see it. The next time any of your proxy attacks our forces, US or Israel, whatever, we are pointing our missiles, first of all, at your main ports where you are exporting oil. If you continue, the next rocket missile is pointing to your largest oil field. The next, I would send them a photo from the top. I am telling you, I'm not, you cannot push me.
We're almost out of time. I'll have Mr.
I want to wholeheartedly agree with you. The oil export terminals would be a logical target because you could, in about 15 minutes, destroy the Iranian economy. Where Hillary Clinton had it when she left office. Second thing I'd say is that Saudi Arabia did fund a lot of Wahhabi extremism. They did fund the religious police internally. They have reformed in a major way. It's not perfect by any means. It still needs our focus and our attention. But Saudi Arabia is a different country than it was 9 years ago. That was the whole beautiful thing when the United States had a good relationship with Saudi Arabia under the previous administration, and when Israel was about to sign a peace accord with Saudi Arabia, we can have those conversations. I think there's got to be a zero hate and a zero terrorism policy in Gaza, and UNRWA should be expelled from Gaza. The education ministry of Hamas must also be expelled. The curriculum destroyed. We cannot continue to breed anti-Semites and terrorists at the hands of the UN in Gaza and frankly and the West Bank.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Baird. We couldn't agree more. And we were almost out of time here. We promised everyone a 1 hour session, including your office. But I do want to just thank you for joining. It really means a lot. It's a big honor to have you here. I want to ask you if there are just any last thoughts you want to leave us with, and especially the students who are Hasbara fellows on campus are really on the forefront across the U.S. and Canada. And whether there's any just parting thoughts you would have for them.
Just be brave, be courageous, stand your ground. I sort of feel a little bit of sympathy because I was a conservative on campus, so I know what it's like to face a hostile audience. But I never had to face violence. I never had to face the administration, joining with the mob. But be brave, be courageous. It will get better, and we must hold civilized people to account, like Claudine Gay at Harvard, like Representative Bowman, like the Cory Bush in Missouri, Eliot Barr in Minneapolis. These people got to understand that democracy is a two-edged sword, that people can lift them up, but they can also defeat them for their anti-Semitic views.
Thank you so much for being with us. It's a true honor. And I just want to announce to everybody on the call, students and those who are no longer students, Hasbara, we are taking delegations to Israel this summer. We were there in December. We're actually the first student group to come back after October 7th, we're proud to say. Student leaders all over from all over the U.S. and Canada, and we'll be there again in May and again in June. So applications are currently open. So for those who are no longer students, please let any students know in your family, and to students that are with us, please tell your friends, other student leaders, of course, and please look into applying yourself if you haven't been on a Hasbara mission to Israel. And Mr. Baird, thank you for joining us.
And thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everyone. And continue to count on me as a friend and supporter. And let me know whatever I can do going forward.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks again. Have a good night. Have a good rest of the week, everyone. Thank you.